At sunrise, in the heart of West Africa, something quietly radical unfolds. In Butenga, a line of trucks edges forward not in frustration, but in fluid motion. Overhead, LED lights blink calmly above the freshly painted asphalt. Automatic barriers lift with precision. Receipts print instantly. No bribes, no delays, just a clean, modern toll station built not by foreign contractors, but by the Burkinabe themselves. This is not just infrastructure. This is a revolution in trust. And just 42 kilometers away, another kind of revolution was paved in concrete. The road from Sakoinse to Kudugu, once riddled with potholes and failed repairs, had been the symbol of neglect. Rehabilitated poorly by the construction firm Sorubat, it stood as a monument to the old way where public money disappeared and no one was held accountable until 2024. That year, under the stern leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traore, the government ordered Sorubat to rebuild the entire stretch at their own expense, not patch it, not compensate for it, rebuild it, every meter, every coin, no repair. Traore declared from a mud-soaked construction site, only restart, because this road belongs to the people. It was more than a contract dispute. It was a signal of a new era in governance, where the state would no longer tolerate the quiet theft of public dignity through poor roads and poorer excuses. That same discipline stretched across the country's arteries. In 2025, 3 toll stations, Tintalou, Butenga, and Kodadugu, were unveiled. Together, they cost 17.42 billion CFA francs, financed entirely by domestic funds. Each station featured 13 automated lanes, license plate recognition, mobile money integration, and real-time traffic analytics. This is no longer just about payment, said Prime Minister Apollinaire Kyelem de Tambela. It is about transparency. It is about trust. Early results were telling a 15% rise in toll revenues, a 60% cut in wait times, and for the first time, receipts that matched reality. 2 projects, one philosophy: public infrastructure must serve the public good. In a nation long paralyzed by potholes and paper receipts, Burkina Faso is laying something deeper than pavement. It is laying the foundation of trust layer by layer, coin by coin, and as the asphalt stretches further into forgotten regions, a new question emerges. What if roads were more than routes? What if they were reminders that sovereignty began long before the launch ceremonies and digital toll booths? The reality of Burkina Faso's roads was not just broken pavement, it was broken trust. From the capital Ouagadougou to the agricultural heartlands, transport routes had decayed into metaphors of abandonment. Over 57% of the country's classified road network was rated poor in 2023. During the rainy season, trucks stalled for days, produce rotted in containers, farmers were stranded, students cut off, and ambulances redirected or turned back entirely. The cost of moving goods reached over 400 CFA francs per kilometer, almost twice the West African sub-regional average. In a landlocked country with no functional railway, each pothole became a tax on the poor, a toll on the farmer, and a barrier to opportunity. Captain Ibrahim Traore knew that fixing roads wasn't just about moving vehicles. It was about restoring mobility to an entire people. And so in 2024, he launched what would become one of the most ambitious infrastructure programs in Burkina Faso's modern history, Faso Mebo. Translated simply, Faso Mebo means the road of the Burkinabe, but in its substance, it was something far deeper, a declaration that the era of dependency was over, that the Burkinabe would no longer wait for international consultants to draw maps, or for donor agencies to release blueprints. The nation would build its own road to sovereignty. At the core of Faso Mebo were 3 pillars, each grounded in self-reliance and strategic vision. The first, local materials, local methods. Central to this was the Dono technique, a Japanese-inspired, low-cost construction method using compacted earth reinforced with cement. It allowed roads to be built and maintained affordably, even in flood-prone or remote regions. More importantly, it used what Burkina Faso had in abundance: earth, grit, and determination. Before Dono, building a rural road meant millions of CFA franc foreign firms and long delays. With Dono, villages could construct durable roads at a fraction of the cost, employing their own hands, using their own soil. The second pillar, mass employment. Faso Mabo was not subcontracted to outsiders. Instead, it became a national work site, an engine of opportunity. Thousands of young people, especially from rural areas, were trained and hired to take part in surveying, clearing, compacting, and finishing the roads. For many, it was their first job. For all, it was more than work. It was a chance to build something lasting in a country where youth unemployment had fueled frustration and migration. Faso Mabo offered a rare alternative purpose. "We're not just earning money," one young worker said. "We're building our country." The third pillar, decentralized oversight. Rather than managing the program entirely from the capital, the government empowered communities to supervise construction, monitor progress, and protect infrastructure. Local committees were formed to ensure that road quality was upheld and funds were properly used. In doing so, the state was not just delivering infrastructure, it was delivering democracy and asphalt. Across Burkina Faso, small villages found their voices amplified. A road was no longer something done to them. It was something built with them. And that changed everything, from the dusty plains of Yatenga to the flood-prone basins of Gourma. Faso Mabo became a movement, part civil works, part civic awakening. On any given day, you could find a teenage girl operating a leveling tool, a retired schoolteacher checking gravel layers, or a farmer delivering earth for compacting. Faso Mabo was not just a plan. It was a proof point that the state could deliver, that public money could produce public good, and that a sovereign nation could pave its own path, literally and figuratively. In the words of Captain Traore, we build together, because no foreign blueprint fits our terrain better than our own hands. That spirit became infectious. Ministries began adopting similar principles, favoring local procurement, transparent bidding, and community involvement. What started on the roads began reshaping how governance itself was practiced. The road was no longer just a connection between places. It was a connection between people and power, between dignity and delivery. And as each kilometer stretched forward, it carried with it a message not just to travelers, but to future generations. We are not waiting for development. We are driving toward it with our hands on the wheel. If roads are the veins of a nation, then accountability is its heartbeat. In 2024, that heartbeat quickened in Burkina Faso, starting with a single stretch of asphalt that refused to stay silent. The 42-kilometer road from Sakoense to Koudougou had already been rehabilitated once, but it took just a few months for cracks, literal and figurative, to reappear. The public was outraged, and this time, the government didn't offer apologies. It offered action. Construction firm Sorubat, responsible for the project, was summoned. But instead of negotiations or settlements, the message was simple and sharp: rebuild everything at your own cost. Not a patch, not a facelift, a full restart. At the site, standing amid mud and concrete, Captain Ibrahim Traore made his position clear. No repair, only restart, because this road belongs to the people. The statement sent ripples across ministries, contractor offices, and dusty construction sites nationwide. It was a watershed moment not only in infrastructure, but in governance. For decades, failed public works had been met with silence or scandal. Now, there was a new precedent. Accountability was not optional. Public funds were not political favors. Every franc would earn its footprint on solid ground. That same spirit soon reached another frontier: toll roads. For years, toll collection in Burkina Faso had been synonymous with frustration. Long queues, handwritten receipts, suspicious cash boxes for transporters and citizens alike. Paying tolls often meant paying twice, once for the road and once under the table. But in 2025, the government launched a bold experiment in digital governance. 3 modern toll stations were inaugurated at Tintaloo, Butenga, and Cotedougou. Together, they cost 17.42 billion CFA francs, financed entirely from domestic funds. But this was not just another construction project. It was a new model of transparency. Each station featured 13 lanes with automatic barriers, license plate recognition, mobile money payment systems, and real-time traffic analytics. Drivers no longer had to step out or argue over change. Cameras recorded every transaction, receipts printed instantly. The system didn't just move cars, it moved the culture. Within months, results followed. Toll revenue rose by 15%. Wait times dropped by 60%. And the most dramatic shift, citizens began to trust the toll booths. This is no longer just about payment, declared Prime Minister Apollinaire Guillaume de Tambela. It is about transparency. It is about trust. Indeed, the booths became symbols of something greater that the state could not only build, but manage efficiently, cleanly, and openly. And the digital wave didn't stop there. Under the umbrella of the Smart Burkina initiative, the government rolled out over 900 smart traffic cameras nationwide. These weren't just surveillance tools, they were management systems. Equipped with AI and connected to national traffic centers, the cameras tracked vehicle flow, alerted for bottlenecks, and enforced road safety rules automatically. To support this, more than 3,000 kilometers of fiber optic cable were laid, linking toll plazas, municipal offices, and rural outposts. This digital backbone allowed for real-time monitoring, data-driven planning, and responsive maintenance. Burkina Faso was no longer just building roads, it was building a nervous system. Alongside, over 800 new telecom stations were deployed across underserved regions, bringing not just connectivity, but visibility to places long forgotten by policy. From the Sahel to the Central Plateau, no village would remain invisible in a digital map. But these innovations were not just technical, they were political. They redefined the relationship between the citizen and the state. Take the driver at the Butenga station who once waited an hour, now through in under 5 minutes, or the logistics manager who no longer loses inventory to potholes or police bribes, or the smallholder cooperative in Kunyi that doubled its delivery frequency thanks to reliable, trackable roads. These were not isolated improvements. They were systemic. They reflected a shift from improvisation to precision, from opacity to accountability. And for the people of Burkina Faso, long accustomed to promises without proof, each beep of a toll scanner, each frame from a traffic camera was a quiet confirmation the system is working. Perhaps most important, the Ministry of Infrastructure didn't stop at hardware. It began releasing quarterly performance reports. Civil society groups gained access to toll revenue data. Local media started tracking construction timelines, and the public followed. What began with cement evolved into governance. What started as roads turned into reform. As Traore once noted, every contract is a covenant, and every kilometer delivered on time is a promise kept. In the end, Burkina Faso's most transformative construction was not the physical road, it was the road back to trust. From muddy highways to digital gates, Burkina Faso's new roads did more than carry trucks, they carried a message. And not everyone was comfortable with where that message was headed. For decades, infrastructure development in West Africa followed a familiar script. Foreign consultants drew the plans. Foreign contractors poured the concrete. And foreign banks wrote the checks, usually with conditions attached. Success was measured not in kilometers completed, but in donor compliance. Captain Ibrahim Traore disrupted that script by insisting that Burkina Faso use local labor, enforce local accountability, and fund major projects independently. He challenged a system long taken for granted, and the pushback was swift. In early 2025, a European Development Agency publicly questioned the long-term viability of the Faso Mebo program. French media warned that Burkina Faso was drifting away from international standards. Behind the headlines was a deeper concern. A government in West Africa was daring to build without permission. But Traore was unmoved. "We no longer build roads to impress Paris or Washington," said a senior advisor in response. "We build to reconnect our farmers, to open our markets, and to stop begging." And this wasn't rhetoric. By mid-2024, several foreign-funded infrastructure projects were suspended. Committees once staffed with donor liaisons were disbanded. Ministries that had previously relied on technical advisors from abroad began promoting local engineers and technicians. In their place came a new generation of partners, regional institutions like the West African Development Bank BOAD, the Islamic Development Bank, and the World Bank, which committed $216 million to reinforce the Sikasso-Korhogo-Bobo-Dioulasso corridor. More importantly, these deals were negotiated on Burkina Faso's terms, with a clear insistence on maintaining national ownership over every meter laid. International critics labeled the shift populism, but inside the country, it felt like something else: self-respect. For years, many Burkinabe had watched as glossy donor logos adorned half-built structures and unread strategy documents. Now, they were seeing actual progress roads completed, tolls modernized, and contracts enforced. Citizens began asking, what did all that foreign aid actually build? The answer, increasingly, was not much. Traore's approach was not anti-West. It was anti-dependence, and that distinction mattered. By redefining infrastructure as a domain of sovereignty, not just service delivery, his government tapped into a broader shift across the continent. In Ghana, Rwanda, and Morocco, leaders were likewise experimenting with locally led development models. But Burkina Faso's version stood out for its intensity and its clarity. It wasn't just about building faster or cheaper. It was about building without compromise. That meant rejecting offers when terms weren't right. It meant holding contractors, foreign and domestic, to standards that reflected the dignity of the people. It meant saying no, so that someday the country could say yes to a future built on its own terms. Diplomatically, the country began to recalibrate. Rather than rely on single-source funding or historic ties, Burkina Faso diversified. It forged new infrastructure partnerships with Moroccan engineering firms, engaged in South-South technical exchanges, and positioned itself as a testbed for African innovation. Internally, this sovereignty shift was mirrored in communications. Government briefings began highlighting domestic achievements over foreign grants. Media coverage focused on execution, not just announcements. And in classrooms and village meetings, a new narrative took root. Burkina Faso was building not just for today, but from within. The contrast was sharp. Where foreign consultants once toured project sites in SUVs, now young Burkinabe engineers arrived on motorbikes, carrying blueprints, laptops, and pride. Where procurement used to mean waiting for donor clearance, it now meant community boards approving local sourcing. For many outside observers, the transformation was jarring. But for Burkinabe citizens, it felt like justice. "This is not just concrete," said one village elder watching a new road take shape. "This is dignity. And that we do not outsource." Burkina Faso's transformation didn't end with pavement. It pressed forward into cables, code, and sunlight. In late 2025, the government unveiled its most forward-looking initiative yet, Burkina Faso Digital and Green 2030. More than a policy, it was a redefinition of national identity through innovation. The goal was bold: to become one of the first countries in West Africa to fuse infrastructure with digital intelligence and clean energy at scale. At the center of this shift was the Smart Burkina program. Over 900 smart traffic cameras were deployed along key corridors like RN1 and RN4. These weren't just for catching speeders, they were part of a nationwide traffic management system. Each camera could detect congestion, report incidents, and feed data back to urban planning dashboards in real time. The entire system was stitched together with over 3,000 kilometers of fiber optic cable connecting toll booths, regional offices, and even rural checkpoints. For the first time, Burkina Faso could see its own movement. From Ouagadougou to Fadangourma, every trip became a data point, every vehicle a participant in national insight. But no nervous system functions without energy. And so, the country turned to the sun. The PAS solar plant, generating 30 megawatts, now lights entire districts. The Zagtuli plant, once a flagship of earlier reforms, is being expanded to serve both cities and critical infrastructure. Along rural highways, solar-powered streetlights cast long shadows where darkness once reigned. Charging stations for electric two-wheelers are in pilot phase. Even remote monitoring units for roads now run on solar panels. This union of silicon and sunlight marked a quiet revolution, one that replaced dependence with design. What once required waiting on diesel shipments and donor funds now operated on Burkina Faso's own terms, powered by its own sky. And behind every camera and solar array stood a philosophy etched into policy and echoed in classrooms. Modernization is not about mimicking the West, Captain Traore declared in a national address. It is about building systems that work for our people, on our soil, with our values. This vision found traction across institutions. The Ministry of Infrastructure began publishing quarterly transparency reports. Civil society groups were invited to monitor projects. Contractors knew they'd be rated not only on delivery, but on integrity, and more importantly, citizens noticed. Public confidence began to shift. In Afrobarometer's 2025 survey, Burkina Faso recorded one of the highest trust levels in government among Sahel nations. For the first time in years, optimism outpaced resignation. At the new toll plaza in Tintaloo, attendants wore clean uniforms, receipts matched payments, queues moved like clockwork. What had once been a site of irritation became a symbol of competence. As one school teacher from Koudougou put it, it's not just the roads, it's the way they make us feel seen. And in villages once cut off during rainy seasons, markets reopened, students arrived on time, and ambulances no longer turned back. Infrastructure became more than a public good. It became a civic mirror. It reflected a government learning to serve and a people daring to believe. For generations, Burkina Faso had been defined by what it lacked: ports, pipelines, capital. But now, it was being redefined by what it had reclaimed: control, clarity, and cohesion. The numbers told one-story transport costs down 20%, toll revenues up 20%, thousands of jobs created. But the deeper truth was in the psychology. Where potholes once stood for decay, now there stood pride. In schools, students wrote essays about roads not as metaphors of corruption, but of courage. In homes, parents explained to their children not what had failed, but what was finally working. And at every kilometer post, a quiet contract was being signed, not with pen and paper, but with presence and proof. Dignity was no longer a promise. It was a process, poured in concrete, cabled in data, lit by solar light. As 2030 approaches, challenges remain: climate, funding, regional volatility. But something irreversible has taken hold: a momentum, a mindset, a message that in the heart of West Africa, a nation once marked by what it couldn't do is now defined by what it will do.